If you're new to fishing, you'll probably find it overwhelming sometimes by the number of ground bait mixes that we've got to choose from in today's tackle shops. We've never had a bigger selection than what we have now, and it's just great fun to go out there trying different mixes and trying to find something that's going to give you that little bit of an edge. I've been asked a few times recently about the best way to actually go about mixing the ground bait, and to be honest, you know, most branded ground baits out there, they're not really cheap, and the last thing you want to do is start wasting it, because that's ultimately going to make your fishing a lot more expensive. So in this video I'm going to be showing you how I go about just mixing ground bait for general purpose fishing. Now, most ground baits that are available usually come in 1 kilo bags. Now, one of the first things I will say to you, and best bit of advice I can give you, is to just measure your bait out. The more you go fishing, the more experience you're going to get, and just by spending more time on the bank, you're going to get an idea about how much ground bait you're actually going to need for a session. Now, a typical bag of ground bait is about 1 kilo. That's the most common size bag, and in a 1 kilo bag of ground bait there are actually 3 pints of ground bait in it. Okay, so when I'm fishing through winter, when I'm fishing venues where I'm not going to be casting too frequently, I'll probably only use about a pint of ground bait. However, even in summer, when you might be casting more frequently, you might be catching more fish, it's surprising how little ground bait you actually use, and that's because in summer you tend to be feeding more particles, more maggots, more casters, more worms, more bait. So that means when you're fishing with a feeder, there's actually less ground bait going in that feeder, because more of the feeder is taken up with the loose offerings that you're putting in. So the next time you go fishing, just measure out the amount of ground bait that you're going to be using, because you'll probably find that a 1 kilo bag like this, you're probably going to get at least 3 sessions out of it. Now, once you've measured out your ground bait, just take a look at the actual mix itself. Now, there are so many different mixes out there. Each mix has got its own quality. Now, obviously it's got smell, but there is also the consistency of it, and whether it's a fine mix or a coarse mix. Now, as a general rule of thumb, coarser mixes tend to take a little bit more water, and that's because those larger particles will absorb more of the water, whereas the really fine mix like this one, you may find that you don't need to add as much water to it. So as always, the best bit of advice for mixing ground bait is add the water little and often, because that way you're not going to spoil it. If you add too much water to it, you're going to spoil it, and then it's either going to be incredibly difficult to bring it back to a state where you can fish with it, or it's going to be impossible, which means you've got to throw it away, and that is wasted money, and it's downtime as well, and it's going to take some of the enjoyment out of your day. So add your water a little and often. All right, now I'm going to just add to this bowl a little bit at a time, all right, and just give it a good mix round. Now, the first thing you may notice is that I'm using a round tub, a round container. That means that you're not going to be getting bits of dry ground bait caught up in the corners like what you would do with a square or a rectangular bowl. So that's just going to mean that the water's going to get distributed throughout the mix much easier. All right, so round bowls are always best. And this is also the stage where, if you do want to flavour your ground bait in any way, lots of people like to add additives or try and give their ground bait an extra boost. That's where you would add that into your water that you're mixing this ground bait with. So that could be a bait dye, or it could be a flavouring. All right, so I can just keep adding a little bit at a time to this mix until it's in some sort of state where I think it's taken on enough water. And that is going to be the first stage. That's the thing, you know, that a lot of newcomers to the sport, they tend to think that they can rush the mix. Now, I've just mixed that, I've just added 2 lots of water to it. This video is in real time, so you're getting an idea of how quick I've just added those. But now I need to let this rest. This mix is going to take about 15 minutes or so to absorb that water, and what we're going to find in about a quarter of an hour that the mix will have dried out, and that means that we're going to need to add a little bit more water to it. Take your time with it, don't rush your mixing. So it's been 15 minutes now, and this has gone much drier now from what it was. All right, usually when you add water to a ground bait mix, it's going to darken it down as well. So when you see the actual natural ingredient in through the little window in the packaging, when you see the ground bait on the shelf in the tackle shop, just bear in mind that it will go darker than that when you add water to it. But that's if you think that ground bait colour is important. So I'm going to need to add a little bit more water to this. I'm not going to add too much. That should be enough. Give it a good mix round. And then again, I'm going to give it another 15 minutes to give it a chance to soak in that last bit of water that I put in. As you can see, when that's wet, it starts to clag a little bit, and that is over wet at the moment. That is too wet, but like I said, in another 15 minutes that should just be about right. The next and final stage is to put it through a sieve. Now, I know there are lots of people out there that don't really think about sieving their ground bait. What I will say is that some people mix their ground bait with a drill and a whisk, and if you do that, you probably find that depending on the mix that you're using, you might not need to use a sieve or a riddle for your ground bait, because when you're using a drill that's mixing the ground bait at high speed, it really distributes the water evenly. So depending on the mix, you might find that you don't need to sieve your ground bait if you've used a drill. However, there are lots of mixers out there that are great mixers in their own right, but just when you're mixing them with your hand like this, you just find that there are lumps in there, and you know, you don't want lumpy ground bait, because what's happens is these lumps are actually areas that have taken on more water than others. And what happens is, if they were in your swim now, so if they were going into your swim feeder, into your feeder, or you were putting balls of ground bait out there, those are actually lumps of ground bait, and if a fish eats those, the fish is going to fill itself up much quicker, and you don't want that to happen. All right, you want a nice even mix. So all I would do now is simply pop that onto a sieve like this one. There are lots of different grade sieves out there, or riddles. What I will say to you, just try and match the sieve to the actual mix that you're using, and by that I mean that this particular one I'm using here is 3mm. Now this is ideal for a really fine mix, which is what I'm using today. However, if this was a really coarse mix that had lots of feed in there, what you'd find is that with a 3mm sieve like this one, is that even when we put the ground bait through this sieve, because it's got a coarser feed in there that's bigger than 3mm, all that would be distributed and left here actually on the sieve. So maybe then you need to step up to a wider sieve, you know, a 4mm, 5mm, or even a 6mm, depending on the type of mix that you're using. All right, so this is a really nice fine mix, so all I'm going to do is pop it on there and then just push it through the sieve. That's all you need to do, and that's going to distribute all those lumps, that have taken on more water than the others. It's going to finally distribute them throughout the whole of the mix. So when we get that off, as you can see there, we're left with a really fine, even ground bait mix. The key thing to remember with ground baits is don't rush mixing them. Simple as that, you know, just add water a little bit at a time, take your time with it, because that way you're going to ensure that you're not spoiling the mix and ultimately wasting money and wasting your time as well. Some people like to mix their ground bait the night before, and I even know some top anglers that love to do that on certain occasions, and if that's going to give you the confidence that you need in your mix, then by all means do it. By taking your time mixing your ground bait, you're just making sure that it is going to be right. There are lots and lots of variables out there in fishing, and lots of things that we can't control. However, this is something that we can control, and hopefully by getting it right, by spending time experimenting with different mixes on different occasions, it should help you put more fish in the net. Well, I hope you found this latest addition to the Fishing Basics series useful. If you have, please give it a thumbs up, and I look forward to seeing you next time.